All right, gotta say this. Lesson 47, Satan's Final Doom from Adventures in the Story of Hope. Talk about a title that really grabs you.
It certainly does.
So we've got teacher notes and review questions, even activity suggestions. Like we're opening a Sunday school time capsule here.
And I think what's so interesting is that we're not just looking at a story,
Hmm.
but a whole method for teaching a particular worldview.
Yeah, like how does this interpretation of the Bible try to explain good and evil? I mean, the ultimate fate of evil.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. The origin story of this curriculum talks about Lucifer, later Satan, as this incredibly beautiful and intelligent angel.
Hmm.
Almost like the star pupil before pride leads to this huge downfall.
Yeah, this contrast, the idea of perfection becoming corrupted, I think it really speaks volumes.
For sure.
It raises the question, if even an angel created by God could rebel, what does that say about free will?
Right.
Like, did God plan for this to be a possibility, or is it a limitation even on divine power?
Whoa, that's a big question right out the gate. And the curriculum doesn't shy away from the drama either. It describes this rebellion as a declaration of war between Satan and Eve,
Right.
with God promising that one of Eve's descendants will ultimately crush him.
That promise is key. It introduces this thread of hope and redemption that runs through the whole biblical narrative.
It's like setting the stage for this showdown centuries in the making.
Exactly.
And that, of course, leads to the arrival of Jesus, who, being a descendant of Eve, fulfills that ancient promise.
Mhm.
The curriculum really emphasizes that Jesus resists all of Satan's temptations, ultimately striking that fatal blow through his death on the cross.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
They argue that Jesus' victory, it isn't through force or violence, but through self-sacrificing love.
Okay.
It's this act of love that they say breaks the power of sin and death,
Yeah.
freeing humanity from Satan's grip.
So it's not just a physical battle, it's a spiritual one.
Yeah.
But wait, there's more.
Yeah.
We then get this concept of the millennium, this 1,000-year period where Jesus reigns on earth and Satan is totally bound. Unable to influence anyone. Can you imagine a world with zero temptation?
It's a really fascinating thought experiment, isn't it?
Total.
Would human nature even be recognizable?
You know.
Yeah, I mean, would we even need rules or laws if everyone was basically perfect?
Right, exactly. Would we even recognize temptation if we never experienced it?
It's like, what would even be the point of making choices?
Yeah, it challenges our understanding of what drives human behavior.
It's deep stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, well, this is where it gets really interesting for me, because after the 1,000 years, Satan is unleashed for this final showdown.
Which suggests that even after 1,000 years of divine rule, that potential for choosing against good, it's still there.
So even in paradise, that darkness is still lurking.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, is this release a test? A final opportunity for humanity to show its loyalty? Or is it more like a reminder that evil is something we can never fully escape?
It's a chilling thought.
Yeah, it is. And Satan doesn't mess around. He gathers this massive army described as being like the sand on the seashore to attack Jerusalem.
This imagery is clearly meant to evoke this sense of, this overwhelming force.
Yeah.
A true battle between good and evil.
An epic showdown.
And then they even mention Gog and Magog as possible names for those who side with Satan.
Gog and Magog, those names sound like they're straight out of a fantasy novel. What's the deal with them?
Well, they're these figures shrouded in mystery.
Mm.
They pop up in a bunch of religious and mythological traditions.
Okay.
Some people think they were specific historical figures, while others see them as these symbols of forces opposed to God.
Right.
But their inclusion here, it just adds this extra layer of intrigue. It makes you think, who are those who would ultimately align themselves with evil?
So it's not just about one bad guy, it's about choosing sides.
Yeah.
And in a world that's seen 1,000 years of peace, you gotta wonder what would make anyone choose to follow Satan.
Exactly. It suggests that the allure of power of rebellion, or maybe even the fear of losing that freedom,
Right.
it might be enough to sway even those who have lived in paradise.
Well, whatever their reasons, it doesn't end well for Satan or his followers.
No, it doesn't.
The curriculum describes this fire raining down from heaven, obliterating his army, and Satan himself being thrown into the lake of fire and brimstone. Yikes.
The lake of fire, it's described as a place of eternal torment. It's the ultimate consequence for choosing against God.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a place you want to end up.
Not at all.
But there's this one detail that really caught my eye. It says that the beast and the false prophet are already suffering in the lake of fire before Satan even arrives.
That detail is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, what's up with that?
It suggests that there are, different levels of punishment,
Oh, okay.
like a hierarchy of evil even within this eternal torment.
It's giving Dante's Inferno vibes.
Right.
It really makes you wonder who are these figures and what they did to deserve this fate. So we've gone from a picture of Satan as this radiant angel to his ultimate demise in a lake of fire, with this hint that there's even more to the story.
It's a wild ride.
Where do we go from here?
Well, we've laid out the story, but now it's time to really dig into what it all means.
Okay.
What does this interpretation tell us about good and evil? The meaning of free will and the power of temptation. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll explore these questions and more.
Okay, we're back, ready to dig even deeper into this Satan's final doom lesson. We've got the fall of Lucifer, the temptation of Eve Jesus as this Satan crusher, 1,000 years of peace, an epic final battle, and then boom, the fiery fate of those who choose the wrong side.
It's a story packed with action for sure, but it's also got all these layers of symbolism, and theological weight.
Yeah, it's like reading a fantasy epic, but with these huge eternal consequences.
Right, exactly.
And one thing that keeps coming back to me is this mention of the beast and the false prophet already in the lake of fire before Satan even gets there.
I know, it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, what's the deal with that?
Well, it really emphasizes the idea that there are degrees of evil. Like, even in the afterlife, there's this hierarchy.
So it's not just a one-size-fits-all kind of punishment.
Right, and it makes you wonder, like, how are these judgments made? What makes one sin, worthy of a harsher punishment than another?
And who are these figures anyway? The beast and the false prophet. It's like they're making a cameo in this cosmic drama.
Yeah, they're mentioned in other parts of the Bible, like Revelation, but their exact nature is still debated.
Okay.
Some people interpret them as specific historical figures, while others see them as symbols of these broader forces.
Like what?
Like political oppression or religious deception, that kind of thing.
So it's open to interpretation.
Yeah, and that ambiguity just adds to the mystery,
Okay, let's go back to this concept of the millennium, though, because it still feels kind of mind-boggling to me. This 1,000 years of peace and harmony. It's like utopia.
It's a really fascinating thought experiment.
It is.
To imagine a world where there's no suffering or conflict, where everyone's just vibing with God's will.
Yeah, but it also makes you think about some pretty deep questions.
For sure.
Like, would we even be human after 1,000 years of... The curriculum says that Satan is bound, unable to influence mankind during this time.
Right.
It's like hitting the reset button on human nature.
It is, and that raises the question, like, what happens to free will in a world like that?
Right.
Would we still be able to even choose wrong, or would those bad impulses just vanish?
I mean, could we even appreciate the good without experiencing the bad?
That's a good point.
Would we even understand love, forgiveness, sacrifice if there was no temptation to overcome?
It really challenges our understanding of what it means to be human.
It's like, are we just robots programmed to do good at that point?
Right, exactly.
And then the curriculum throws this curveball by having Satan released eventually.
I know.
Which means that even after 1,000 years of spiritual perfection, the potential for darkness, for choosing wrong, it's still there.
It is. It's almost like it's built into us, this capacity for evil.
So is this release a test then, like a final opportunity for humanity to prove its loyalty after tasting the ultimate good?
I think that's one way to interpret it, yeah.
Because it's not just about following the rules when there are no other options. It's about actively choosing good, even when you understand the bad, right?
Exactly. It shifts the focus from obedience to understanding, from blind faith to informed choice.
But even with all of that awareness, Satan still manages to convince a bunch of people to join him in this last battle.
He does.
What could possibly motivate them after living in paradise for 1,000 years?
Well, it shows how powerful some temptations can be. Maybe it's the allure of power, the excitement of rebellion, or even the fear of losing that freedom.
So even in a world that's experienced perfect goodness, there are still those who would choose a different path.
Yeah, there are.
Which I guess brings us back to those consequences we were talking about, that image of the lake of fire as the ultimate punishment.
Right. The curriculum uses some intense language to describe this place, emphasizing just how serious it is to choose against God.
Yeah, eternal torment, fire, and brimstone. It's definitely not a vacation spot.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
But it also raises questions about the nature of punishment. Like, is it just about retribution, or is there also an element of rehabilitation?
I mean, is the point to just punish the wicked, or is there any chance of transformation even in this realm of suffering?
That's a question people have been debating for centuries, and the curriculum doesn't really give a clear answer.
Oh, okay.
But it does suggest that judgment is individualized, that not all sins are treated equally.
Which brings us back to the beast and the false prophet already being there.
Yeah.
It implies a hierarchy within this realm of punishment, which really makes me curious about how these different levels are determined.
Right. It challenges us to think about what really defines evil and how those judgments are made. Is it about the amount of harm caused, the intention behind the actions, or something else entirely?
There's a lot to consider.
Yeah, definitely.
So we've gone from this picture of Satan as a radiant angel to his fiery demise, explored this whole idea of the millennium, and even touched on the nature of judgment in the afterlife.
It's been quite a journey.
And while the curriculum gives us one specific interpretation, it also encourages us to grapple with these bigger questions, about good and evil free will and what happens when we make choices.
Questions that are relevant even if you don't subscribe to a particular religious belief.
So what's next? We've really explored this interpretation in depth, but I'm curious how this concept of Satan's final doom has been portrayed in other ways.
That's a great question. And it's actually perfect because in our final part, we're going to shift gears and see how this story has been depicted in art, literature, and even pop culture. Get ready for some fascinating takes.
Okay, so we've spent the last two parts really getting into the nitty-gritty of this Sunday school lesson on Satan's final doom.
Yeah.
The whole story, the symbolism, those thought-provoking theological questions it brings up. But now I'm curious, how has this concept been interpreted outside of this, specific religious context?
That's a great question. And it's amazing how this story, even though it comes from religious texts, it's really made its way into art, literature, music, even film.
Right.
I mean, the fall of Satan, the temptation of Eve, the final battle between good and evil, they've captured people's imaginations for centuries.
Yeah, for sure. Where do we even begin? I feel like there are so many examples.
Well, one of the most iconic works that deals with this theme is John Milton's Paradise Lost.
Oh, yeah.
It's an epic poem that kind of reimagines the biblical account of Satan's rebellion and the fall of humanity. But what's really interesting is Milton's portrayal of Satan himself.
Yeah.
He's not just this simple bad guy. He's this complex, almost tragic figure wrestling with pride, ambition, and this sense of injustice.
Right. And he has some of the most memorable lines in the poem.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven.
Exactly.
It's almost like you can empathize with his motivations, even if you don't agree with what he does.
That line really captures the rebellious spirit and the tragic nature of Satan's fall. It also speaks to that human struggle against authority, the desire for power.
Yes, powerful stuff. And then there's Dante's Inferno.
Oh, yes.
Which takes us on this terrifying journey through the circles of hell, right?
Yeah.
Culminating in this encounter with Satan himself, frozen in ice at the very center.
Dante's depiction of hell is so vivid. It really makes you feel the suffering and despair. It's like a warning about the consequences of sin and the weight of eternal judgment.
It's intense. So we've got these literary masterpieces exploring Satan's fall and the concept of hell, but it doesn't stop there, right?
No, not at all.
I feel like satanic imagery is everywhere from heavy metal album covers to horror movies.
It's true. Satan or the devil has become this really powerful symbol in popular culture.
Yeah.
Sometimes he represents rebellion, transgression, even the dark side of human nature.
Like in movies like The Exorcist or The Omen, they play on those fears about demonic possession and evil invading our world.
Right. Those films blur the lines between what's real and what's supernatural. They tap into our anxieties about the unknown.
It's scary stuff, but then you also have these more lighthearted depictions like the devil as this mischievous trickster in cartoons or comic books.
Yeah.
Often tempting characters with, forbidden knowledge or power.
Even in those humorous contexts, there's still this fascination with temptation. The allure of the forbidden is like a reminder that those desires are always there, lurking beneath the surface.
It's interesting how the portrayal of Satan has changed over time from this purely evil figure to this more complex, even relatable character.
Yeah, and I think that reflects our evolving understanding of human nature and the complexities of good and evil. It shows how these powerful figures adapt to different cultures and still resonate with new generations.
It's really fascinating. So we've gone from a Sunday school lesson to Paradise Lost to The Exorcist. It's amazing how this one idea of Satan's final doom has permeated our culture in so many different ways.
And that's the power of these enduring stories, these iconic figures. They speak to something fundamental about being human, our fears, our desires, our struggle to understand good and evil in the world.
This deep dive has been quite a journey. We've explored the specific interpretation from the religious curriculum, and then we've seen how those themes and images have shown up in art, literature, and pop
Yeah,
culture.
it's been a lot to cover.
It has. It's made me think about the nature of evil, the power of temptation, even the meaning of judgment in a whole new way.
And that's the great thing about exploring these narratives. They make us think critically, wrestle with these big questions and come to our own conclusions. It's not about having all the answers, but about keeping the conversation going.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the legacy of this fascinating and sometimes unsettling tale. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.